This video is about the Covid19 mRNA vaccine. And that's what we're going to talk about mostly today. But before we do, let's go back to the fundamentals. We all know that we're made up of cells, and that in those cells we have a nucleus, and inside that nucleus we have DNA, all twisted up and stranded, and that somehow this DNA is what allows our bodies to construct itself from cells. Great. Let's see how that works a little bit in more detail. So let's say this is the nucleus, and in blue we'll talk about things with DNA from now on. And here's a strand of DNA. And in response to an environmental cue, or maybe just time goes by, a protein will bind to the DNA, a complex of proteins actually. There's a lot of work to be done to read it, and those proteins will read it and produce mRNA, which will be in red. That mRNA gets processed and eventually exported out of the nucleus, where it can begin working. And the work it does is to make a protein or set of proteins at a ribosomal complex like this. And here's the mRNA being read in that complex, and it produces a polypeptide chain, a chain of amino acids that gets ordered according to the message on this RNA. So green will be for proteins in this video as well. So this protein then gets folded up, or this peptide chain will end up getting folded up into any number of shapes depending on the message, and those shapes determine what its role will be. It could be an enzyme that'll catalyze a reaction. It could be something structural. It could be something part of the cell's mechanical machinery. But a lot of these proteins get expressed or placed into the cell's membrane. And they're there specifically so our immune system can be trained both to recognize ourselves, proteins that belong to us that are produced from our DNA, and to recognize proteins that are foreign. So a long time ago, someone realized that viruses are made up of proteins and RNA, and they realized that if they take a person who's healthy and they inject them, some of you are cringing right now at the size of this syringe, they inject them with proteins that came from a virus, that they could gain immunity to that virus. Well, the coronavirus vaccine doesn't work that way. It doesn't work with protein. It works with mRNA. The same type of mRNA that our bodies use naturally in our cells, and that degrade after a few hours and stop producing proteins. So how does this work? How does an mRNA vaccine work instead of our normal, like our flu vaccine or polio or any of those other vaccines that we get? How does an mRNA vaccine differ from a standard protein vaccine? Well, first let's just color this red, indicating that this is now mRNA, and see what happens inside the body. Your cells, with their nucleus and their DNA all protected, and the ribosome um, or ribosomes, there are hundreds, thousands of them in your cells, are situated like this. And normally, the vaccine would be in your bloodstream, the protein vaccine would be in the bloodstream, and your immune system would recognize that protein. But in this case, we're not putting a protein vaccine into the bloodstream, we're putting mRNA into the bloodstream. And oftentimes, to protect it, we've encapsulated it in something that will actually allow it to get into the cells much easier. These are usually small liposomes or something of that nature. So, the mRNA, some of it, makes its way into a cell, and of course, goes to the ribosomes and begins producing peptides that get folded into proteins. And then eventually those proteins get on the surface of the cell, and your immune cells detect it and begin the immune response. So the extra step is all right here to get this protein into your body. Now, in the case of the coronavirus vaccine, this is the coronavirus spike protein. Okay, so why do it this way? Why not do it the old way with protein? Well, this is a question of cost, speed, and safety. In order to introduce this protein, if we were to go the old way, in order to produce just this protein and get it into your body, we have to grow live virus. And that virus, let's say, looks something like this. It has its full complement of RNA, not just a piece of it. And it has a protein shell. And in this case, I'm going to represent these little spikes here as the coronavirus spike protein. And we have to grow up this whole structure. Well, if we wanted to just give you immunity, or if we found that the part that gives your body immunity best is this protein right here, that means we have to discard all of this, somehow filter it all out. Well, that filtration is costly and not speedy. So instead, what we've done is gotten the genetic sequence of the virus, and used that to create multiple copies of a part of that virus's mRNA or RNA to make copies of an RNA synthetically. And again, not all of the virus's RNA, a small portion of it. And because this is done synthetically, we can do it rapidly, cheaply. And because we don't have to filter out all this other stuff, we increase safety because we know we are only giving the part that codes for this protein. And that's basically it. The protein is now in your body, your immune system kicks in and develops an immunity to it, and after your second dose, you are about 95% sure that you're immune.